Okay, there is one point I wanted to address this week in regards to my little short videos that I've been putting up online when I was too busy to make feature full-length videos get a lot of unwanted attention, or I should say wanted attention, because the whole purpose of putting these out there is in the hope that they reach people who have doubts about AA. As far as the AA defenders, well, there's not much I could do about that. But there was somebody that was really trolling the hell out of my channel there at one point about everything that science has got wrong, and then he even made a bunch of assertions, which, by the way, are not true, about most evolutionary well, he didn't say biologists, he said evolutionists, which there's no such word, by the way, as far as the science of evolution encompasses many different fields, from molecular biology to genetics to many other things. So it's not like you've got a group of people that say we're the evolutionists and we're going to control the narrative. But he was saying they don't know about where life comes from, which is a different field of study altogether, called a biogenesis, which is a completely different branch of science. And then he said nobody even knows what that is, which that's also very untrue. But I thought, in light of all of this kind of stuff, it brings to mind a certain logical fallacy I've heard from time to time thrown at me over the years about, and I'm not one of these people that necessarily says science can provide an answer to everything. I don't think it does. There's plenty of things science does not provide an answer to. But I thought that I would address that just because you can find an error in science does not automatically prove the AA religion is correct. And make no mistake about it, it is a religion. It reminds me of this thing in the We Agnostic chapter where he says modern man is a stickler for the facts, yet we believe things without evidence. And then he goes so far as to actually compare electricity to faith. Electricity is not something we believe in without evidence. Electricity is something that can be demonstrated, it's something Bill didn't apparently understand. But in light of all of that, I was going to say that, yes, science can be wrong. Science is frequently wrong. Science is wrong often. In the study of physics in the past 10 years, it's been kind of a rough ride for them. They've had to retract several studies that couldn't be replicated. They've had an issue with fabricated studies about certain theories that couldn't be formulated properly. But in no way does that prove that the AA cult religion is correct, because science is often flawed. The point that I wanted to make at the beginning of this is, because science is flawed, frequently wrong, frequently biased, this is actually its greatest strength. But it's not a modern phenomenon to claim that modern people are a stickler for the facts, therefore, faith is taking a hit over there. No. Bill W., I don't guess ever heard of the Enlightenment, that period in the 17th and 18th centuries when people started saying, rather than blindly swallow the dogma that religion has been shoving down our throats for the longest time, maybe we should try different methods to try to understand the world around us and how reality functions. Maybe we should actually look into what mathematics can tell us, what a healthy dose of skepticism can tell us, what these other things can tell us. I'm not saying that all these men of the Enlightenment were anti-religious or something like that. Newton was very much Newton was a religious person, or at least he was a believer in God, per se. But these people who were looking beyond just the simple dogmas of religious society that the Middle Ages had on us, and even in the Middle Ages, you had plenty of scientific minds. You had people like Galileo that said, I got this idea that maybe the sun's not spinning around us, but we're spinning around the sun. Even before then, you can go all the way back to the Greeks, during a time when a certain mathematician looked down a well and he saw certain shadows at a certain time of day, and he decided to take a stick and measure the shadows of the sun from a different vantage point, or a different point in geographical locations, and he said, there's a pretty good mathematical equation that I could kind of come up with these measurements, being the bottom of the well and being the stick with the shadows from the sun, and I got a pretty good idea that we might be looking at a round Earth. The Earth might just be round. And at the time, you had people like Aristotle that said when the ships go over the horizon out there, the hulls kind of tend to go this way, leading to kind of a plausible idea that maybe possibly the Earth is not flat but round. There's always been scientific inquiry. There's always been curious people who have been willing to look beyond the basic narratives that society imposes upon us. There have always been people, even before David Hume I think it was David Hume. I don't know his name is Hume, but I believe it's David Hume, who believed in skepticism and who believed in questioning what was put down on pen and paper by the church elders or things of that nature, or the authority figures, is saying we might want to look at these things with a healthy dose of skepticism. We might want to see if these conclusions that we're just accepting at face value are correct. And even before his time period, where he sort of began what became later known as empiricism, there were curious minds that actually wanted to get to the truth of the matter and wanted to see beyond necessarily what was told to them. Science is always changing. The original people who discovered that the Earth might be round, or the circumference of the Earth, the calculations might have been off base or wrong about some of their conclusions. Some of the astronomers who didn't believe that the Earth revolved around the sun were wrong in some of their other conclusions about astronomy, some of their ideas about what the stars were. That doesn't mean that they were invalid for what they got incorrect. It meant that with the technology they had at the time and with the little limited means of at their disposal, these were the conclusions they reached. However, when they put forward these ideas, when they said maybe the Earth is round, maybe, just maybe, the sun doesn't revolve around the Earth, but the Earth revolves around the sun, they were willing to be proven wrong. They were willing to be proven incorrect. The men of the Enlightenment who looked at the Earth around us and tried to formulate ideas about gravity, about motion, about physics, about the skies above and what could be there, they never put those things down on pieces of paper and said, this is the way it is. It can never be questioned. It can never be proven wrong. I figured out that this is the law of motion, and that's the way the law of motion works. We're not even going to ever have anything like energy and mass calculated, a few centuries later or something like that. They didn't put these down as dogmas. They didn't put these down as absolutes that could never be proven wrong or disproven. Some of Darwin's early theories about evolution have largely become considered out of date because we know more now. We have better methods of figuring out things and how they work. We have better tools. We have more advanced technology that enables us to understand certain mysteries of the world a little bit better, with a little bit more precision. And even those theories today could be proven wrong. They could be proven incorrect. They could be proven inaccurate. Up until a certain point in time, everybody, after it was discovered, said Pluto was a planet. Now, they no longer really call it conclusively a planet. It doesn't change the fact that it exists. It doesn't change the fact that it's out there, because these ideas and theories were not formulated through articles of faith, through one person saying, this is just the way it is. And if you don't believe that's the way it is, you're just closed-minded and bigoted and prejudiced and blind and all that other thing. But I've seen a lot of these quack, pseudo-spiritual kind of people that will try to point at the fact that this is some kind of modern phenomenon, in this world with all this technology and these telephones and computers and internets and connections and electron microscopes and all these other things, we've forgotten what it means to be human. We were more human back in the days when the world was lit by fire and we put leeches on people to bleed them out when we thought they were sick, because epilepsy was also probably a curse from God and a demonic plague. Yeah, the world was a much better place back then because we were more in tune. We were more spiritually connected to something that's never been proven. That's not exactly 100% true. You would find people in the Middle Ages that even had problems with the notion of the Inquisition and burning people for being witches. You had people in Salem who took the note of this might not actually be a case of witchcraft here. There may be a perfectly logical explanation for all of this. Witchcraft may exist, but we don't know that these ladies here in Salem are under the influence of a demonic presence. You've always had skeptical minds. It's not something that just immediately popped out as some modern phenomenon that's caused us to all get disconnected from some made-up higher power, spirit of the universe that's never demonstrated itself or shown itself to anyone in a way that couldn't be logically explained or rationally, or with a rational explanation behind it. But I'll tell you one thing that can't change. I tell you one thing that can't adapt. I'll tell you one thing that can never evolve, and that is cult religion like AA. You can't go into an AA meeting, at least not any official AA meeting I ever went to in my 11 years. By the way, I had a troll comment the other day that said, you obviously weren't in AA very long. Yeah, I was in AA for over 11 years. been doing these videos for quite a while. This is not something I decided to start doing because I had a resentment, want to go drinking again, as someone was trying to, It's always funny how they assume to know your motivations for something, even though they know nothing about you, which, by the way, goes directly against what they claim to have, which is an open mind. They have none. But cult religion can never be wrong. You can't go to an AA meeting right now and say, you know what? After years of research into psychology and other things, going around doing inventories about yourself and saying you're a horrible human being and having to start the day out on your knees, claiming you're a defective creature that needs to be, that can only function in life as long as a higher power, your imaginary friend, is telling you what to do, that's not really overall good for people's mental health. We have studies that show that this is not good for people's health. We have things that we have observed in history that shows this is not good for people's health. And what will AA people do? They'll tell you you're closed-minded. They'll tell you you're just resentful. They'll tell you you're prideful. You don't want to get sober. They'll tell you any kind of excuse they can, but they will never, ever give 1 inch to say that maybe, this book that was just pretty much pulled out of thin air by some con man back in the 1930s is probably not scientifically valid. None of the assertions he makes in that book can be demonstrated to be real in any way, shape, form, or fashion unless you decide to close your mind off from everything we know about the world today and scorn everybody who is interested in finding what the real answers are and where they lie in all of this. People who cling to this romanticized, idealistic notion that there was this wonderful organization called AA back in the 30s that just solved everybody's problems, which, by the way, a growing body of evidence that I have access to shows that that was not the case. There never was no first 100 members that all magically did this book and all got completely sober. There never was, there was this perfect success rate in AA until the more modern world got involved in it, and modern man with his closed mind and drug addicts and all that. I've even had them say the reason that AA is failing like it is because they're not alcoholics, they're drug addicts. Yeah, even though they'll tell you that only you can figure out if you're an alcoholic or not, but they can sure quickly diagnose you if they don't like the narrative that you're talking, or they don't like your opinions, or they don't like what you're saying. They can quickly paint you as something you're not really quickly. You see, in cult religion like AA, if the shoe doesn't fit, they don't try to adjust the shoe. They don't try to get a new shoe. They just try to force the shoe to fit anyway, and they'll figure out any kind of excuse or loophole that needs to be made up in order to do that. They can't say, this is not exactly valid in the modern world. This idea about ego and all of that from Freud and from Jung and all of those, most of those psychiatrists are considered outdated by today's standards. Very few people in modern psychology actually refer to their own works as say the guiding light in order how to treat a patient. We know they were pioneers for their time. We know they were way ahead of their time in some ways, but we also know now through modern means that they were actually incorrect about a lot of things. Usually when you see the popular notion of psychiatrist's office, you either get that old cartoon idea, the person laying on the couch and the person sitting there taking the notes, or you get something like you saw on The Sopranos where Tony Soprano's saying, I had this strange dream last night that involved that. Most modern day psychotherapists don't actually deal with dreams. They don't actually necessarily say, did you have a dream last night where you were walking down Main Street and you were wearing a strange uniform that was a different color and everybody was pointing at you and laughing at you? Well, I'll tell you what that means right now. I can tell you that, right? That's largely considered an outdated practice that's not really in line with the current working models, with the current working theories. The Big Bang is not considered a religion as far as a model of the ever-expanded universe. One little inconvenient truth tomorrow could throw the whole entire theory out the window. That is why, when it comes to science versus cult religion, science is a little bit superior. Not because it's absolute. Not because it says this is the way it is, and you must never change it. Not because people hold hands every day and say, I believe in the Big Bang, I believe in the Big Bang, I believe in evolution, I believe in evolution, I believe in evolution. That's not how that works. They look at the evidence as it presents itself in both the lab and in the physical world itself. They look at evidence to come to the conclusions they come to, and when the evidence doesn't correlate, they throw that out. Cult religion doesn't do that. Cult religion only has one way to survive. It has to stay closed off. It has to stay stuck beyond any way to evolve or change in any way, shape, form, or fashion. Occasionally in an AA meeting, you'll hear somebody say something like, well, there's parts of that big book that don't apply to me today. But the steps and the spiritual principles, there's no such fucking thing as a spiritual principle. There's no such thing as any kind of, if you want to talk about ethics, if you want to talk about a conduct or something like that, that's why they got names for those things. They're called ethics. They're called conduct. They're called those types of things. They're not called spiritual principles. Nobody's ever been able to demonstrate a spiritual principle or a human behavior that has some mystical origin that nobody can account for. Pretty much the behavior of human species that there's a lot of mysteries to the mind. We haven't figured them all out. We may never figure them all out. But a lot of basic human behaviors that the AA cult deems as character defects and sins are pretty much easily explainable in today's world. And I'm not talking about this pop psychology thing where when someone says, I'm pissed off at my job today, and it's like, you're just afraid that your ego is not getting noticed and that if you lose your job, you won't have financial insecurity. No, I'm not talking about shit like that. I'm talking about things that have a more encompassing depth to human behavior than they did in the 1930s, than what Freud or Jung could have came up with, because they didn't have access to a large majority of patients to formulate some ideas with. They largely had to test these ideas on themselves. Ego is kind of an outdated idea because the duality of man is also looked at as a very outdated idea. In fact, when it comes to the idea of a soul, there is some evidence that would actually go against that notion, since if you had some kind of brain damage, or I forgot the procedure that can be done where one side of your brain is talking to you and the other side of your brain is talking to you at the same time. If I ever figure out what that is, I'll post it on here. I'll talk about it in a future video. Everything that we know so far about human behavior can be perfectly explained biologically and rationally by mental processes and by the brain itself. Okay, there's no evidence or anything captured on camera or anything to point at the fact that you're somehow, you're over here taking a drink out of a bottle and there's a higher power right behind you looking at you with scorn and mockery and saying, well, fuck you, you didn't do your fourth step anyway, I'm not going to protect you. We don't have any evidence for those kinds of things. But cult religion can never admit that, yeah, we got this wrong. We got this completely wrong. And by the way, this idea that back in the 1930s when Bill W. wrote this bullshit, that it was done because nobody in the medical community had any clue as to what to do with people who drank heavily, that too is a lot of garbage. I don't have the quote in front of me right now, but I can certainly put my hands on it, where the American Medical Association said, they actually said in their own words, that one of the major problems with addiction that is completely out of date, now this is 1930s AMA saying this, is this idea of institutionalizing people. They say this big book that's been written has absolutely no scientific merit or value whatsoever, other than some religious ideas and overtones to it. There never was some time where back in the 1930s Bill W. was needed because the medical community was scratching their heads and saying, I just don't know what to do about these people who are drinking themselves to death all the time. That's another fabrication that I found out through doing some real extensive research about the topic at hand. Science is frequently wrong. It gets lots of things wrong. Psychology is wrong. It gets lots of things wrong. Okay? That's the strength of it, because if they do find their errors, they can retract those errors. They can change those errors. They can update. Cult religion cannot. Cult religion's got to stay stuck right there in 1935 when Bill W. is sitting on his ass talking about character defects and moral inventories and all these things that don't have nothing to do with addiction whatsoever. You know, I was looking at a clip from Burn the Stigma that was talking about the difference in language with alcohol use disorder and things like that versus calling people addicts and alcoholics and drunks and all those other stigmatizing terms. For a very long time now, society kind of accepts it at face value that if you got the crime of being addicted to something, you just deserve everything you get because you're just a garbage human being that doesn't deserve anything good. And if you do manage to stop drinking, just remember, you're always going to be one step below the rest of us. And you better be humble and kiss up and suck up to everybody all the days of your life, apologizing for something you might have done 20 fucking years ago. You don't have to take that shit. It's not healthy for you. It's not beneficial for you. If you committed a crime that you got to pay for, That's something that only you can know how to do that. But you certainly, if you just had a drinking problem and ruined a few, and whatever you've done in life, it's not so bad that you have to go on apology tour all the days of your life, constantly inventorying yourself because you had a drinking problem. For a very, very long time in my so-called drinking career, I went home every night and I sat down in front of the computer and I nipped out of the bottle until I went to sleep and then popped up out of bed in the morning and started nipping out of the bottle on the way to work. It wasn't good for me. It's definitely not good to drive to work intoxicated. And of course, in my later drinking career, I was really, really out of control. There was no job. There was no nothing. There was living to drink. But that doesn't mean that doesn't mean that I'm some kind of defective human being that's got to beg some imaginary God that there's no solid evidence for that I make up for the rest of my existence about it. And I do find it really silly, this idea of choose your own concept of God. Well, let me ask you this question. If I suddenly say, I'm going to go back to the Catholic Church, which I don't plan to, I'm Catholic, and it says you can't choose your own conception of God. That's against my religion. That breaks the first commandment. How do we determine which one of us is right? The guy over here saying, well, I've been sober several years, and I just made up a God in my understanding. Or me, who's been off the booze for a very long time, that's now Catholic again, saying, well, it's against my religion to do that. I think if you probe really long and hard, at this point, people would say, well, it's just a matter of opinion. No, it's not a matter of opinion. Neither one of these positions can be demonstrated to be real. Neither one of these positions can be demonstrated to be true. I think if you took a long and hard look at both claims like that, me over here saying I'm a Catholic and a conception of God is a sin, and the AA old-timer that's over here stealing out of the basket and exploiting their sponsees and hurting newcomers saying, well, I just made up my own God. You see that all of it is made up. You see all of it is just something without any basis for believing in, without any proof, without anything. You're literally just making it up as you go along. And unless you can demonstrate to me that some spirit of the universe gets pissed off when I drink, then I don't have to accept some claim that I need a spirit of the universe to get me sober. I don't have to accept some claim that I need to make up some God of my own understanding in order to stop drinking, when you can't demonstrate to me that's necessary, especially an organization that has high of a failure rate as AA has. Yeah, science is wrong. Science is wrong often. So is many other fields of things. But they don't stay wrong. They're constantly trying to change and adapt and become newer and improved. Okay? Sir Isaac Newton didn't just say, I tossed this ball in the air and it came down, and that's just the way it is from now on. Nobody better question me about that. You better not question me about my laws of motions, because God told me that's the way it is. He didn't do that. Neither did Einstein about his theories of relativity. Neither did Copernicus or Galileo about their ideas about the universe and how it rotates and gravitates around. They didn't say this is set in stone, this is the way it is. Called religion does. Bill W. says you must do these things or it kills you. Bill W. says if you don't do this, you'll surely die. Bill W. says if you don't conform to their way of life, you sign your own death warrant. He doesn't say, I could be wrong. He doesn't say, this is just what I kind of believe it to be true. He doesn't say it's different for everybody. He doesn't say you can approach sobriety your own way. He tells you you got to do it the way I tell you to do it or you die. He doesn't even leave room, any place where he could be possibly wrong or mistaken. He's telling you that you, as a person who drinks, has all these character defects and are constitutionally incapable of being honest, but you're supposed to trust him as your sole source of truth for everything. Just think about that for a minute. I'd say if we're going to look at science versus cult religion, I'm going to have to safely go with science. See you guys next week.